Well, good evening, everyone. This is a council meeting to host public meetings on matters requiring approvals under the Planning Act. Before we begin, members of the public are advised that only specific stakeholders, including the applicant, the minister, and public bodies, or a specialized person as defined by the Planning Act, and/or the registered owner of any land in which the zoning bylaw or official plan amendment would apply, may appeal the council's decisions to the Ontario Land Tribunal. Further, if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at the public meeting or make written submissions to the Corporation of the City of St. Thomas before the amendments are passed, the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Land Tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to do so. Those wanting to be notified of a council decision on the application should email customer service at customerservice@stthomas.ca, indicating which public meeting they wish to be notified on and provide their name and address. Those who do not have access to a computer and wish to be notified should call customer service at 519-631-1680, extension 0, and provide that same information. Do any of the members of council have a disclosure of interest concerning any of the matters on the agenda? Madam Clerk, what method of notice and when was the notice given to the public for these meetings?
Your Worship, notice was provided in the St. Thomas Times-Journal on Friday, August the 15th, 2025.
Okay, so this is public meeting number 1 to the proposed official plan amendment for community planning system. Yes. The mayor, I'll call the meeting to order and advise the public the following. This is the first public meeting is required by the Planning Act to afford any person an opportunity to make representation with respect to the proposed official plan amendment relating to a community planning permit system for the city. I'm going to introduce our Housing Accelerator Fund Coordinator, Brandon Sloan, who will provide background information on the proposal and present the draft bylaw. Brandon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. So this city-initiated official plan amendment is directly related to one of our Housing Accelerator Fund initiatives. So through this federal program, one of our obligations is to implement a community planning permit system here in St. Thomas, and it's to help with new housing developments. One of the first steps is to establish the overall general policies within our official plan, and that's what's the topic of today primarily. So what is a community planning permit system? Well, it is something that is gaining a little bit more traction now that many municipalities are starting to work on housing programs, or they're accelerating and streamlining development approval process. What it essentially does is create a new bylaw, community planning permit bylaw, that includes or replaces zoning, what you typically would see in a zoning bylaw, site plan control, and minor variance. And it folds it all into one bylaw, one application type. It streamlines it for the development proponent and for the staff review. So how does it get used? Where can this be? So essentially what we need to do is establish the framework policies in our official plan that provide the justification or allow us to pass such a bylaw. And it should include the general parameters and directions for that bylaw. Essentially, you can identify either your whole municipality, or you could identify specific locations like an intensification area or a secondary plan, or a place that might be new development where you would apply the community planning permit bylaw. One of the key items is that it's a 45-day review and decision period, and that's different than for a zoning bylaw amendment, which is 90 days, or for a site plan control is 60 days, or if someone submitted a minor variance, it's usually 1 or 2 months. So that's one of the key differences for this particular piece. So this is working ahead a little bit as to what could be in the bylaw, but it might be helpful for the context of when we're setting these initial policies that can enable us to do the following. So usually you would identify a specific land area within a bylaw. And just like in zoning, you would have a list of permitted uses. But in this case, you would also have a list of discretionary uses that the approval authority could potentially allow that are similar to the permitted uses, subject to certain criteria and under certain conditions that are met and with the justification that an applicant provides. So there's a little bit of flexibility for that. There's still the same development standards. So what you would see in a zoning bylaw, like building setbacks to a property line and maximum building heights, all those are all contained in this CPP bylaw, all those same type of things. You can do them a little bit differently if you want than the zoning bylaw. There's some flexibility for that. One of the other key items, though, is that it allows you to do what you used to be able to do in Ontario for what we call bonusing. So this is one of the very few tools where you can enable or allow for community benefits, in that if a development provides certain things that you identify for that specific area or for the community as a whole, like a certain percentage of affordable housing units, or a contribution towards enhanced park space or active transportation, that could be provided or required in exchange for some added height or density of the developments for additional stories. This is one of the tools where you can do that still. There's another difference too to our current system or the typical development system, is that this bylaw allows different classifications of permit types. So council would be the approval authority for this type of a bylaw, and through that, you would set the overall parameters. Development must be within this box, this maximum height, these type of uses. But, so if you have a proposal that meets all that, boom, it can be reviewed, a permit issued by staff. You can also set this class 2 variation that, well, for some of those, there might be some flexibility because we don't know the exact development yet. So, you know, within 10%, 20%, 25%, whatever the numbers might be, some of the setbacks could be relaxed, or subject to doing some design studies and shadow studies, maybe the step backs of a building could be done through a staff permit as well. But when things are really out of bounds, totally a different proposal than what was set from the bylaw, those must come to council for an approval. Or if someone's proposing to add a whole different use that isn't permitted or a discretionary use, that also would have to come to council for approval. And so this bylaw will set out all the things about the process and the conditions and agreements, things that you normally would see in development. You need kind of the legal teeth to do that in the bylaw. There are some benefits. So like from a development proponent perspective, it could essentially streamline the process, the number of types of studies, applications that you would have to make, and of course the review time that I mentioned earlier. It is much faster. So from the staff perspective, we would have to go through the effort of setting up kind of a second parallel system for an area to do this. But it does allow us then the flexibility to, get into some things that we otherwise couldn't do through zoning. And that could be specific to whatever that local area that we do or that community, what those objectives are, could be baked into that bylaw to try and achieve those objectives. So what's before you and what's coming to council then is the proposed official plan amendment would be in our implementation section of our OP. Currently, we don't really have any policies about this system. So we would be adding some policies, and the way that we've kind of created it is that hopefully they're done in an enabling way, and they're done in a general yet specific way that we wouldn't have to amend them every time we would go through a bylaw and go through another process to come back and amend this. So we've given it some thought to once you actually come forward with the bylaw, it should fit nicely under all of these policies. And the policies talk about the overall goals, where you could apply this, generally what the process is, and it gives that you have to have certain criteria within the future bylaw. You also need these policies so that you can have these conditions in a development agreement and to do those community benefits and those different classes that I mentioned. So what's next is that we will review any of the public submissions that we would have as part of the public process, prepare the recommendation report and the final official plan amendment and bylaw. We're currently targeting October 6th council to do that. And then once we have that in place, that would enable us and free us up to then work on a pilot area for a community planning permit bylaw. And we're looking at doing that this fall. And essentially, that is the presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Great job. Madam Clerk, have we received any written submissions on the proposed changes?
Your worship, we haven't received any written submissions other than a feedback form from Zain Rajani, and that was submitted at the August 25th Public Information Center. Comments received at the Public Information Centers would be summarized in a future report to council.
Okay, thank you. I'll first ask council, do you have any questions? I'll go with Councillor Clark, then Councillor Peters.
Thank you. You mentioned discretionary land use as part of the, it may be premature, maybe something that you will write in, but who makes the decision on that? And the other question I had was community benefits. Who would be the referee to decide a dispute between ourselves and a private developer?
Brendan?
Sure, thanks, through your worship, to the councillor. So the first question there, actually, maybe it would be better to do about the dispute. So for that particular one, what you would look at in the community planning permit bylaw would be identifying, I would propose as specifically as you can, what are those community benefits and how much would need to be provided in exchange for exactly how much new development could be done. And for example, if someone was to provide, if a community benefit was affordable housing and they had to provide 20% of the units below 80% of average market rent in exchange for those certain number of units, they receive 2 extra stories or floors of development. Hopefully that would then alleviate any arguments as to what it is in negotiations. There used to be, you may be referring to, a lot of negotiations about bonusing in the past. I'd like to try and be as specific as possible, and I think you could try and do that through this tool. Ultimately, if a proponent disagrees with that and doesn't follow exactly whatever council sets in that bylaw for that, then they would need to come to council for that. And then if an application they make isn't considered, they could appeal that. Now about the other item was about the discretionary uses. And maybe just to give one example of that is that in a CPP bylaw, you could list an apartment building as a permitted use, and maybe a retirement home or a rest home is a discretionary use. And what you would do is you would have certain criteria and conditions that if this was met, or if it did this, that, and the other thing, then it could be permitted in accordance with those parameters. And then that's typically, if it's within the bylaw and whatever council set, there are parameters where staff could allow for those items, but they still have to give notice and public notice. But if it's anything that's not in that bylaw, so if someone's, say an apartment building is allowed in a discretionary is something like the rest home, and someone wants to build a convenience store. Well, that might need then an application, which would then come to council to amend the bylaw.
Go ahead, Councillor Clark.
Supplementary with those, so those kind of details, I'm assuming, right? I would feel that you need those kind of details to make sure that you don't slow the process down. You know, we're trying to speed the process up. So those kind of details in the bylaw would be needed. Would those kind of be, are you just, the things that you're describing would be part of the October, like when are you trying to get this back to us? Because it sounds like it's a lot of work in a very short amount of time.
Through your worship, to the councillor. So those would not be part of what the first step is for council to deal with the official plan. The official plan basically are policies that says in the bylaw, you shall establish permitted uses, discretionary uses, and also you have to do a public process, go through the bylaw, same kind of process we're doing now, public meetings. So that will be next. And yes, it is a lot of detail and work.
Thank you. Councillor Peters.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. I'll start with, you had the one slide had class 1, 2, 3. Class 1 being where staff have the discretion to make the decision. So let's say the public, a neighbor of some place that if staff makes a class 1 decision, neighbor gets wind of this and says, oi, 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 and he's calling his counselor up. Do I have the ability as a counselor to say, oh, geez, you know what? This person has some good points. This should be under this should have been under class 3. Or is it going to be once we make a decision of all these different classes, if we've delegated authority to you and we as a council don't like what you've agreed to, are we as a council stuck with that, or do we have the ability to push back at staff and say we need, and I've got a couple other questions, we need to have a second look at this?
Thanks through your worship to the counselor. The key piece is the original community planning permit bylaw. That is the one for the public to be involved in, to be aware of what it would allow, and for council to set those parameters. And that's where that comfort level comes in, is whatever is in the bylaw for the chart of the different class of uses, that's what's being set as kind of the rules and the parameters. So if everyone is comfortable with, like, the maximum height is 3 stories, and someone comes in with a 3-story development, it meets that, the permit is then provided. If there is the class 2 allows some variation, well, someone might be coming in with 4 stories and they've done this study, done that, and they actually have a bigger setback. If they meet those things, a notice is provided to the public. The public can ask for a written decision of that notice, but it does not look like there's any appeal rights, or it wouldn't necessarily go to council. If the approval authority through the staff felt that it still didn't meet the class 2, they could bump it up to a council class 3 permit. And anything that's in a class 3 permit is what would come to council. So anything beyond, let's say, that 4 stories example would have to come to council. And that would be in the bylaw.
Thanks.
Sorry,
Yep.
just
No,
as,
please,
just as an add-on to that, all we're approving tonight and all that's before council tonight is the amendment to the official plan portion to really just give us the ability to consider down the road, like fall, winter, into next year, so a specific area where we can apply a CPPS bylaw. And it's that detail that you're talking about right now. When we get into the meats and bones of a CPS bylaw down the road, where we'll establish these parameters. Tonight, we're just dealing with approving an official plan amendment at a high level that will then give us that ability. So this is really just step 1. Step 2 is where we really get into the details when we have a specific site in the city. For example, we're going to be initiating a secondary plan for the railway lands. We may take a portion of those lands as a candidate site where we establish a CPPS as part of that. But that will follow a robust planning and engagement process involving staff, council, members of the public, where we set those parameters and that bylaw is established, and it'll define the various classes, the various land use. So we're not dealing with that specifically tonight. That's just part of what is involved with the next steps. So tonight is really just about, tonight in October 6th is really just about that high level of getting, amending our official plan to allow us in St. Thomas to apply a CPPS system in certain candidate areas in the city.
Go ahead, Councillor Peters.
Okay, and I realize that some of the stuff to what you just said there, but this citywide or focused initiative or slide you presented. So if I'm in a neighborhood and we say, oh, no, we don't want, this is going to drastically change our neighborhood. We don't want 3 stories in our backyards. How are we going to deal with, you want to get people out to a public meeting, start saying that this is what could be allowed in your neighborhood, and this is what's not going to be allowed in your neighborhood. So how are we going to, maybe, and this is another one that's going to come out of, and I do have one more question. How are we going to pick or choose what parts of the city are focused, and not focused? Because I can just see the petitions going through a neighborhood, kind of like 1988 when we went through an official plan and tried to rezone the courthouse area into R4, and the whole neighborhood went ballistic. I can see similar scenarios of pitting neighborhoods against neighborhoods here. Any thoughts on that one?
Thanks through your worship to the councillor. Really, what's intended for this is an initiative to help with enhancing or another tool for new development. So I think initially what we'd be looking at is any kind of new development area. It could be a new greenfield subdivision area, or it could be a new intensification area, brownfield, like maybe it's vacant blocks of land that haven't redeveloped for a long time. Maybe it's part of, right now, it's part of, as mentioned, was looking at in portions of the railway secondary plan area, not necessarily intended for established neighborhoods. We're not really kind of the target for or focus for growth and development to use this tool right now. I think that's safe to say what we're looking at.
Yeah, no, exactly. And just to add on to that, this won't be a policy that will be like citywide, applied citywide. It'll be applied to specific areas that we know are going to be new targeted intensification areas or growth areas. And the sites that I can think of off the top of my head would be current and future secondary planning areas that we're looking at. When we do areas 2 and 3, possibly the railway lands, where we have some greenfield sites within the city that we know are prime sites for some development and intensification. Maybe it's an area to spur development there. But again, there will be no surprises with residents in the area, because the residents in the area are going to be part of that process in terms of approving the CPPS bylaw. They're going to be a part of that and engaged in that process. So they'll be fully aware of what's in that bylaw and what the range of uses and the parameters around those uses are.
Okay. Further questions from council? Councillor Wookey.
Thanks, your worship. I always love us getting rid of things like if our track record is people have asked a similar question 80 times and 80 times we've said yes. I'm all in favor of us getting rid of asking us that question. So these, all these questions that we've had over all the years I've been on this council about reduced setbacks, I can't remember a single one where we have said to a developer no. Now there's times where maybe there've been a few, but I heartily support this kind of thing where let's just be honest about what our tolerance level is. Like let's instead of say here's the rule, but we'll give this exception every time. Let's just be honest about the whole thing. And I think that's what we're looking to do here is just simply streamline things. And I want to say that when I talk to my people I know from outside of St. Thomas that deal with planning departments in other cities, they heap praise on St. Thomas as being already very efficient at what we do and effective at what we do. So I want to shout out to Lou and his team for that. But if we can do something to save a little bit more time, and that's not, as Councilor Peters said, we're not trying to do something here that's overly contentious, that's trying to bypass the wishes of the community. But if we can do something that makes it more efficient, I think it's a wonderful thing that we can do for development in the city. Thank you.
Councillor Herbert.
Thank you, Worship. So it's a good report. It looks like there's a lot of benefits with it. Do you ever dialogue with other communities, municipalities to see how things work for them? Are some of these things you're going to implement, are they actually working in other municipalities?
Through your worship to the councillor, yes. It, as I mentioned before, it hasn't really been prevalent throughout Ontario, but it is picking up steam. There are some of the municipalities that have used it in the past that are a little bit more waterfront based. But I've been dialoguing with Peterborough, who's working on theirs right now. Oakville's had theirs, Waterloo's working on it, but Guelph is kind of an example as well, where they've looked at it for a certain area of Stone Road, and which is a little bit more of a redevelopment area that they're looking at and how they're applying it, because they're further ahead. They have the bylaw in, the policies in place, the bylaw in place, and are now getting permits. So it's definitely good. That's a very good idea, is to look to others that have gone through and see what are the trials and tribulations. How could you improve on it? How could you make it efficient?
And sorry, and just to add to that, it's my understanding, and I stand to be corrected if I'm incorrect here. Any municipality that received HAF funding is going to be implementing a CPPS bylaw and process, because that was one of the top priorities for the federal government in issuing that funding.
Well, I'll let council know, put your hands up at any time and you can jump in with a question, but we're going to also go to questions from the public now. So if you are listening on your computer, tablet, or smartphone, please click the raised hand icon. And that'll let us know that you're ready to answer a question or ask a question. If you've called into the meeting on a telephone, please dial *9. The questions will be taken in the order in which they come in. When given the opportunity to speak, you must first provide your name and address for the clerk's record. So I see we have a couple of attendees here. If either have questions, please use the raised hand icon or dial *9. And anytime any council member has another question, please raise your hand too. So I'll wait for questions either from council or from our list of attendees. And we'll see what else we get from our attendees or from our council. And I'll ask kind of one last time, is there anyone with questions on this public meeting? And then I will say, I think everyone's been given a fair opportunity to ask questions, council included, and some guests online. If there's no further questions, please be advised that any person wishing further information on the actions of council regarding the passing of the bylaw for the proposed amendment should email customer service at customerservice@stthomas.ca, indicate which public meeting they wish to be notified on, and provide the name and address. Those who do not have access to a computer and wish to be notified should call customer service at 519-631-1680, extension 0, and provide the same information. This public meeting is now concluded. And I will move then to public meeting number 2. And these are proposed amendments to the official plan, zoning bylaw 50-88, and the community improvement plan for additional residential units and incentives. I'll call this meeting to order and advise the public that this second public meeting is required by the Planning Act to afford any person an opportunity to make representation with respect to proposed amendments to the official plan, zoning bylaw, and community improvement plan relating to the additional residential units and incentives citywide. I'm going to introduce Mr. Sloan again, who will provide background information on the proposal and present the draft bylaw.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. So the next 3 are related city-initiated amendments about the additional residential units, or ARUs for short, and financial incentives, primarily for housing. They are, again, directly related to implementing HAF, Housing Accelerator Fund Action Plan initiatives. And part, again, of that federal program, we set out to provide a new guidebook for proponents that are looking to do an additional residential unit, to enhance our community improvement plan incentives for residential new housing options, and to amend our official plan and our zoning bylaw to expand on our additional residential dwelling unit provisions that we have. So an ARU, they can come in different types. So you may have a house that has a basement apartment unit, which we've seen before, may have units that are above, or there may be an addition to the side or the back of the dwelling that has another unit or more than one unit in it. So that's an interior ARU type. There may also be the type of an ARU that is detached, as we call it. And that would be, you've got your main dwelling, and then you have the detached ARU, which is similar to, like in the past, there were garden suites or a coach house dwelling unit above a garage, granny flat, or you may have a tiny home. There could also be the hybrid or the mix of those, where you've got the basement apartment unit or one or two units inside, interior, and then you also have the detached ARU. Or you may step up in areas that allow semi-detached or townhouses. Under the legislation, those are also permitted to have an additional residential unit as well. So all of these types are currently allowed in our zoning bylaw right now. And what's proposed as part of the official plan amendment is to update the terminology. So we're looking to call them additional residential units so that we conform to the wording that's in the Planning Act instead of additional dwelling units. We're looking to increase the existing permissions from 2 right now, 2 ARUs, to add 3 ARUs. And just revising the existing clause that the ARUs may be further regulated in the zoning bylaw. And in the zoning bylaw, what's proposed again is to increase the existing permissions for 2 to 3, to add a definition for what an interior and what a detached ARU are, and that will help us with our administration of the bylaw as well. There's also 2 provisions that the provincial regulation require. One is about specifying the maximum lot coverage has to be 45% if you have an ARU. And also you need to specify in your zoning what the setback is to any other building that has residential. Further to that, when we were reviewing this, we're looking at for any ARUs, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, that there should at least be some unobstructed access or walkway for emergency purposes, access purposes that goes to that entry unit. We do not have that in our bylaw right now. And that will be important, we think, if we're going to see some of these. And we've seen that in some of the other municipal examples that have these provisions. The other little detail that we're looking at to clarify for our administration of the bylaw, and so it's clear for property owners and ourselves, is that when you have a detached ARU, it can't be any more than half of the size of the main dwelling unit. It really is supposed to be accessory or subordinate to the main dwelling. It's not really supposed to have 2 dwellings of equal size on the same property. So this is how it kind of plays out in an illustration form. This would be the zoning provisions that exist or that are proposed, along with some other guiding principles that we're looking at as well. And so there's 2 examples that are provided. One is where you have an interior ARU and a detached ARU on the same property and how that works with the parking. And also one where if someone was to go to the extent of having the 4 units within the one dwelling, how that would also work for the access walkway, the parking, and the setbacks. These are to be included in the ARU guidebook. Now, another item that's before us is proposed amendments to our Community Improvement Plan, or CIP. And what that entails and what's proposed is to increase the maximum grant right now is $7,500 for adding an additional residential unit or any residential unit through the residential program. And that's proposed to be increased to $12,500 per unit and from $60,000 per project to $100,000 per project. It's also proposed to increase the loan and the affordable amount from $12,500 to $15,000 per unit and from $100,000 to $120,000 per property, along with expanding it to be citywide. Currently, it's only limited to that primary central area, the downtown and the central area. This would allow for it citywide that we could have these applications eligible. And they would be eligible for the planning and building fees reduction program as well. Now, at the same time, as part of this HAF initiatives, we are looking at, are there anything else we can do in our CIP to help with residential housing programs? And one of the key things we identified as a potential easy win is to expand the brownfield that's redeveloped for residential, not just employment, citywide, would be eligible for our development charge reduction program and the tax increment grant program. And that is something that we think could be of benefit, really will show that we are doing things. St. Thomas, to be honest, I've reviewed the CIP and the incentives. We have a lot of great incentives already. So there's really, not too much more we can go to. But this one seems like in discussions with planning and finance is something that we could go there. And of benefit is what's proposed is we would be using the HAF funding as the source for any additional uptake for any of these proposed expansions that are here. Now, at the same time, we're also doing a few technical updates and updating the map as well. The map that is in the CIP and in the official plan is a little bit old. It doesn't include the northeast part of the city that's known as Yarmouth Yards right now. So as part of this, we are updating the map. So just to finish off, so far the preliminary review of what we've heard to date is we've received some commentary from the ministry that they are supportive of the amendments with a few technical updates to the CIP that they've suggested. One of those is to bring it up to speed with the 2024 provincial planning statement. There's some wording in ours that's a little bit out of date. There's a section that we have that we need to update. A few other things that are looking to be clarified is to specify that the third ARU could also be eligible for the parkland and the development charge program, not just the planning and building fees program, as another little tidbit to help with residential housing. And we keep looking at the ARU zoning. I know at the August council meeting, there were some questions about parking. And we were looking at the potential for incorporating some setback and some visual barrier fencing requirements in the zoning as part of this, so that if someone is doing the parking with 3 or 4 spaces, that they would need to have some kind of landscape setback or some kind of fencing around it to help with some compatibility with adjacent properties. There isn't anything in the St. Thomas bylaw right now about that. So that's one thing that we've picked up that we're looking at right now. Other than that, I think we did get one comment and some positive feedback from our public open house session that we held in August. And our next steps are to review anything else that we receive from the public, resolve any issues, and bring the recommendation report and the final bylaws as well to October 6th is what we're targeting. And then finalize and promote our guidebook. So with that, the presentation is finished. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Madam Clerk, have we received any written submissions on the proposed changes?
Your worship, as mentioned at the previous public meeting, no written submissions except for feedback form submitted by the same individual, Zain Rajani, during the August 25th Public Information Center, and his comments would be summarized in the future report to council.
Great. We'll now open questions to council. First, Councillor Peters.
Thanks very much, Worship, and I appreciate you taking that second look at parking. So I'm going to use a fourplex that is beside me on St. Catherine Street. It has sufficient parking, each unit, 1-bedroom units, each has 1 parking spot, no problem. But they've got enough property that they could put an additional residential unit on the property, probably 2. How are we going to ensure, and let's just, but I'll back that one up a bit, and that they put in the additional residential unit is a 2-bedroom unit. Does a 2-bedroom unit require 2 parking spots? Or is only 1 sufficient when I know that it's probably going to need 2? And I don't want people doing like an end around of saying, okay, well, geez, I'm just going to put 1 in and I'll roll the dice, or I don't even have to roll the dice in the summertime. I can park the car out all the time. And then I'm going to go make an application for an overnight parking permit to the city because we don't have enough parking on our property. So how are we going to catch this stuff up front to ensure that we're not causing bigger problems for the neighbor?
Through your worship to the councillor, yes, parking is one of the key considerations. So there would be a minimum of 1 parking space required per unit. So it wouldn't necessarily get into the number of bedrooms, but at least a minimum per unit. And then the owner, landlord, whoever is renting it out, hopefully renting it out appropriately, but also those that are renting it knowing how many parking spaces are there. There's nothing that's saying that the landowner couldn't provide additional parking spaces if they see fit. But essentially 1 per unit. And there are some provisions from the province about this too, that they don't want us to be too overly regulatory about requiring like an exorbitant amount of parking spaces for these ARUs as well.
And also just to follow up on that, is like the uptake hasn't been as high as we thought it might be or expected. The uptake because a lot of these changes have been in place for several years. And a lot of that does come down to parking. A lot of the existing building infrastructure in the city homes might not have the ability to provide a parking space for each additional dwelling unit, like even if they're just adding a second or third unit. So that's one of the main limiting factors. Can the site accommodate parking? And that's why we haven't seen the uptake that we're expecting. So I don't see like overwhelmingly a huge now an increase in it, because parking and some of these other zoning regulations that we're adding on with these incentives and ARUs may limit. Some properties may be limited. They may not be able to maximize the full extent.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just follow up. And it's nice of the province to wash their hands of parking issues, but the MPP's office isn't getting the complaint about the parking. It's the local councillor. So anyway, I look forward to seeing this one unfold, because I still do have a number of concerns about this, of how this has the potential to fundamentally change neighborhoods, especially core neighborhoods.
Further questions from council? Councillor Wookey.
Thanks, Your Worship. One of my things that always pops through my head is drainage. And I know that we don't really, I don't know this, I think we really don't want people putting catch basins in backyards and attaching them to our storm sewers, because that increases flows and all sorts of things. But in terms of, that's one concern about the runoff, because obviously if you're decreasing grass, you're increasing runoff to someplace else. That's number one. And then a couple other things. The pathway that would go along the side of a house that would go to a separate unit out the back. Mayor Preston talked earlier in the meeting about going on an accessibility scooter. And I'm thinking that is like job one, is to make sure it's wide enough to accommodate a standard size scooter, so somebody could actually get to their place. And then the other thing I was thinking about is the requirement for lighting, like that it is safely lit, such that going around a dark building to go to the back structure is safe. And then the last thing I'll say is just a counterpoint kind of to Councillor Peters' point, being that I think there's a lot of people who don't drive, and I don't want to ice them out of having a unit someplace because there needs to be parking, because there's lots of people who don't drive. And I appreciate the fact that in Toronto, there's a lot of people that don't drive. So it's easier to implement something that does not allow parking in Toronto than it does in St. Thomas. Having said that, in an area where you are walking distance to a grocery store, I could totally see that we would want to encourage units that perhaps don't have sufficient parking. And I would think then that the rent would reflect the fact that there is no parking. I would hope, so just a counterpoint to that, that I believe that there are many people who don't drive. And if we can better our public transit system, we're making their life easier in that regard. So those are my concerns in general about the topic. Thank you.
Comment?
Sure, thanks. Through your worship to the councillor, those are all points we can consider and incorporate into our follow-up report. A couple quick responses, because there are some pretty key items is about drainage that we have been looking at that with our development engineering staff and what would be required for a site alteration permit. And if someone was putting a surface parking lot in, what are the drainage requirements? So we are kind of conducting that review right now. The other part was about lighting, so we'll take a look into that as well. The pathway was a little bit about, we'll have to double check on the AODA standards, but that's partly why we put in the piece about unobstructed. The 1.0 meters is what our current minimum side yard interior setback is. It's kind of tight. We've looked at some others that they push it to 1.1 or 1.2. But since 1.0 is kind of our minimum building setback that someone could do right now, that was kind of our starting point. But the key was it being unobstructed. So I think we'll double check about the AODA and a few other items. So thanks.
Yeah, and in addition to that, and those are all great points, Councillor Wilkie. We're going to be developing as part of this a guideline book to help property owners that may have an interest, developers that maybe have an interest in building an ADU. And those are all great points that we would include in there to show what an appropriate accessible sidewalk width would be. Because most these are always marketed as, used to be called granny flats. So you want to make sure that it's accessible. And that it's safe in terms of providing that access. So our guideline document will show some preferences and OBC requirements as well in terms of what like a sidewalk width should be, design, construction should be, and also lighting requirements as well. Those are all things that we would add into our guideline documents as well.
Councillor Clark.
Your worship, through you, is there any specific details with regard to basement apartments or basement dwellings?
Through your worship to the councillor, in the official plan amendment and the zoning bylaw amendment, there is nothing that is directly specific to that. What really seems to regulate the basement units is more about the Ontario Building Code and Fire Code. Those are some pretty key things, and we've heard that there have been some challenges with doing that and what the codes require. But that's not directly part of the zoning amendments.
Sorry, and again, that's sometimes some of the limiting factors in some of the existing infrastructure, right? The basement ceiling height isn't sufficient, wouldn't pass building code. The window sizes in the basement aren't large enough for an egress and for fire escape. So there are some limiting factors, but as Brandon said, the building code is the main factor when it comes to establishing a basement unit.
Okay, we're at the point where, council, you can ask questions at any time. Just simply raise your hand, but we're going to move on to the public also. So if you're listening on your computer, tablet, or smartphone, please click the raise hand icon if you have a question. If you've called into the meeting using a telephone, please use *9, and that will let us know that you're looking to speak. The questions will be taken in the order in which they come in. And when given an opportunity to speak, please provide your name and address for the clerk's record. So now I've opened it up to the public online and also back to council. Any further questions for council, or if someone asks a question that spurs your interest, please join back in. So I'm looking for our members of the public who are sharing our public meeting tonight on the proposed amendments to the official plan zoning bylaw 50-88 and the community improvement plan for additional residential units and incentives. Council or public, Any questions you have, simply please let us know you're there and you'd like to ask a question. And I'll ask one more time. If there's anybody who would like to ask a question, please do so. Councillor Herbert, please press star 9.
Thank you, Worship. Press our name. Basement apartments would be very difficult to monitor, would it not? I mean, you can rent it out to anybody unless do they have to get a license to rent it out for people in their basement? Like, I think in all the university students in London, I'm sure there's lots of apartments they rent in basements that you don't know about. You can see a new building go up. That's pretty easy, but you can't really monitor I don't think you can basement apartments. Am I probably wrong, right? Sorry.
No, through your worship, no, we don't have a program in place here in the city of St. Thomas where we license units. That you do have that in university cities, college cities, because that is more prevalent. And to ensure the safety of any tenants in those units, they do license them, but we don't in this community. That could be something we can look at in the future. But we currently don't have the ability to do that other than tracking it through building permits.
So I'll ask members of council and members at home, one more shot. Please, if you have a question, please put your hand up or raise hand icon. And if not, there's no further questions, then I will, everyone's been given a fair opportunity to express their views. If there are no further questions, please be advised that any person wishing further information on the actions of council regarding the passing of bylaws for the proposed amendments should email customer service at customerservice@stthomas.ca, indicating which public meeting they wish to be notified on and providing their name and address. Those who do not have access to a computer or wish to be notified should call customer service at 519-631-1680 extension 0 and provide the same information. This public meeting is now concluded.